They didn't raise their voices. They didn't cause a scene. All they did was walk into a diner, sit down at a window booth, and order 2 coffees, black, no sugar. But 15 minutes later, the cops had the place surrounded. The waitress ducked behind the counter. The cook hit the silent alarm. And the sheriff's deputy, hand already on his weapon, leaned in with the kind of look usually reserved for wanted men. "We got a call," he said, "about 2 individuals matching your description, talking about plans, vaults, escape routes. Sounded like a heist." Carl Rollins, a tall black man in his late 50s, didn't flinch. Denise, his wife, gave a polite smile and stirred her tea. "Interesting," she said, "because we were just talking about bank security systems from a federal compliance standpoint." The deputy didn't blink. "That's not how it was reported. That's how it started. 2 ordinary people labeled as threats based on nothing more than an overheard conversation and a whole lot of assumptions." But here's the twist no one saw coming. Carl and Denise weren't criminals. They were undercover FBI agents on assignment, deep in a federal sting operation targeting police corruption and financial crime. And the very man leading the local investigation against them, the sheriff himself, was the main suspect in a 6-month probe involving money laundering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. You might think this kind of thing only happens in movies. But the truth is, racial profiling doesn't need facts, just fear. And in towns like Miller's Junction, fear moves fast, especially when it's pointed at the wrong people. This isn't a story about a robbery. It's about wrongful suspicion, police misconduct, and how 2 seasoned FBI agents turned the tables on a system that thought it could silence them. They didn't pull out badges. They didn't make speeches. They played the long game, patient, precise, and dangerous to the kind of men who think the law is something they own. Over the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear how a quiet lunch turned into a takedown, how the smallest town in Kentucky became the scene of a federal sweep, and why Carl and Denise Rollins are now whispered about at Quantico with the same reverence reserved for legends. This isn't fiction. This is how justice moves when it wears a poker face. If you've ever wondered what real undercover investigations look like, without the drama, without the Hollywood, and how quickly truth can flip the narrative, don't blink. Because this story isn't just satisfying. It's a masterclass in staying calm, staying focused, and letting the facts win. So get comfortable. What you're about to hear is true. And it all started with a cup of coffee and a waitress who couldn't keep a secret. Carl Rollins didn't look like trouble. That was the first mistake the sheriff's department made. The second? Assuming Denise was just his wife. She was his partner, both in marriage and in federal operations. Her file at Quantico was thicker than most case law books. Between them, they had nearly 40 years of combined experience in federal surveillance, counterintelligence, and high-risk undercover missions. But in Miller's Junction, all they saw was a black couple asking too many questions. 2 weeks before the diner incident, Carl and Denise had moved into a modest rental just outside town limits, a brick house, peeling paint, nothing fancy. Carl told the neighbors he was a retired security consultant, Denise a freelance researcher for a university project. They smiled, waved, and barbecued in the backyard like everyone else. But inside the house, satellite uplink, audio intercept systems, a command board tracking 3 high-value targets in the sheriff's office. Their mission? Expose a laundering network that funneled stolen municipal funds through fake construction bids, an operation that had grown so confident it was using official sheriff vehicles to move money. It didn't take long for Carl to sniff out the weak link. Deputy Todd Brinker, eager to please, quick to act, and dangerously gullible. Carl played him like a fiddle, dropped little breadcrumbs, asked him where the town's credit union made its night deposits, asked about staffing patterns at City Hall, all under the guise of small talk. Todd never once questioned why a retired guy from D.C. cared so much about bank floor plans. Denise, meanwhile, was working quieter angles. She enrolled in yoga at the community center, joined the town Facebook group, and struck up a conversation with the wife of the sheriff's financial officer. Over cookies and decaf, she learned about missing invoices, late-night visits to the county records building, and whispers that certain traffic citations were being fixed for cash. Every piece fits into a broader picture, one that painted Sheriff Wallace not just as corrupt, but arrogant enough to believe no one would come looking. The couple's operation followed strict FBI protocol. No direct confrontation, no exposure unless necessary. But on the 12th day of their assignment, Carl caught something on the bug they'd planted in the sheriff's truck, a conversation about cleaning house and getting rid of liabilities. The voice wasn't just Wallace's, it was Councilman Griggs, head of the town's budget committee. That changed everything. They were no longer dealing with just dirty cops. This was organized collusion at the local government level, federal crimes, conspiracy, misuse of public funds. Carl sent the update to Washington. The Bureau approved escalation. They had 1 week left. That's when the problem with Todd happened. Apparently, someone overheard Carl and Denise reviewing case notes while filling gas at the Quick Mart. Carl had said something like, "We hit the vault during shift change. Make sure surveillance is on delay." It was code. Denise responded, "Camera 3's still blind. They'll never see us coming." Harmless if you understood Bureau shorthand, dangerous if you were Todd Brinker, who happened to be at the next pump, ears wide open and head full of cable TV crime shows. Within an hour, he was on the radio to Sheriff Wallace. "I think we've got a situation," he said. "Possible armed robbery suspects. Could be planning something big." Now, you might think any decent sheriff would do a background check before dispatching 4 units to a diner. But Wallace didn't hesitate. If there was one thing he feared more than federal oversight, it was losing control of the narrative. And if there was even a sliver of truth to what Todd reported, Wallace wanted to be the one who caught it, on his terms. What he didn't realize was that Carl and Denise had predicted this exact outcome 3 days earlier. It was part of their contingency plan, Operation Hawkeye, a carefully structured undercover sting that allowed for exposure under the threat of detainment. Denise had already programmed a silent ping to alert the regional FBI field office if she triggered the sequence from her watch. Carl had backup flash drives hidden in the lining of his leather wallet, one labeled car insurance, the other dry cleaners. Both held hours of audio implicating 3 senior officers and the town clerk. So when Wallace burst into the diner, chest puffed, boots loud, flanked by armed deputies, Carl didn't react. He'd been in worse situations in Fallujah. Denise simply sighed and pushed her tea aside. "I told you we'd get interrupted," she said. "You owe me $5. The deputies didn't cuff them. Not at first. Wallace didn't want a scene. Not in public. Not yet." He gestured calmly, as if this were a routine matter, but his jaw was clenched, and his eyes never left Carl's hands. "We'd appreciate it if you came with us, just to answer a few questions." Carl stood slowly, nodded, and placed $2 on the table for the coffee he never touched. "Of course," he said. "Happy to help. Always respect local law enforcement." Denise rose behind him, quietly tapping her wristwatch under the table, 3 times, precise and subtle. The signal was sent. Inside the sheriff's department, things moved more slowly, the kind of slow that doesn't mean methodical, it means nervous. Carl and Denise were separated, placed in 2 windowless rooms. The walls were thin. Denise could hear boots pacing, a typewriter clacking. Somewhere, someone slammed a cabinet too hard. Carl sat at a table with nothing but a manila folder in front of him. Todd Brinker entered first, trying to puff up his chest like he'd seen in some crime drama. "Look," Todd said, "we've got reason to believe you 2 are connected to something serious. Plans, surveillance, talking about bank vaults and security systems." Carl smiled. "You ever plan a birthday party, Todd?" The deputy blinked. Excuse me? A birthday party. Takes planning, timing, surveillance if you're real good. Carl leaned in. Doesn't make it a felony. Brinker shifted in his seat. He knew something didn't add up. These two didn't act like guilty people. They acted like people watching him. An unsettling feeling crept in. Still, he was under orders. Sheriff Wallace stepped in next, all charm and false concern. You know, I hate bringing folks in like this, just trying to keep the town safe. Of course, Carl said, calm as ever. Safety's important. So is following proper arrest protocol. Wallace's smile faded a notch. Carl had been in enough interrogations to know when someone felt the pressure flip. Wallace was sweating, not because of the suspects, but because he didn't know who they really were. The surveillance footage from the gas station was queued up on a laptop. Todd played the clip. Carl and Denise's voices, distorted but clear. Hit the vault during shift change. Camera 3's blind. It sounded bad, out of context. Denise, watching from the next room through the two-way mirror, chuckled softly. They knew the Bureau trained them to expect surveillance. That line was bait. Wallace leaned forward, now sharper. So who are you really? Is this your idea of a joke? Carl didn't flinch. What does the warrant say? We didn't book you yet, Wallace said quickly. Just a conversation. Unlawful detainment, Carl said, cool and steady. No charges, no Miranda, no access to counsel. That's 4 violations of civil procedure in under 30 minutes. Todd looked up, alarmed. Wait, what? Wallace shot him a glare. Get out. Meanwhile, Denise was working faster than anyone in that building. In her purse was a flash drive disguised as lipstick. She'd swapped it in the ladies' room, loading backup files onto the sheriff department's public terminal when the receptionist stepped away. Evidence was now sitting in plain sight. Audio logs, email intercepts, even a scanned invoice signed by Wallace himself approving double-billed equipment purchases. She returned to the interview room just in time for Wallace to storm in. You think you're smart? He hissed. You think you can come in here, play games with us? Denise tilted her head. Sheriff, we're not playing anything. You are. And you're losing. The phone rang in the next room, sharp, twice, then silence. Wallace ignored it. Carl leaned back and said calmly, That's your last chance to stop digging. After this, the dirt lands on you. But Wallace didn't stop. He signaled Todd to prepare holding cells. Separate them, he ordered. Put them in lockup while we sort this out. Todd hesitated. Sheriff, I don't think they... Just do it! That hesitation would later save his career. As Todd walked Denise toward the hallway, she leaned toward him just enough for her words to be clear. Internal Affairs knows everything. Right now they're just watching to see how deep you go with him. Todd stopped cold. What did you say? Denise didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said enough. Moments later, the front doors of the sheriff's station burst open. 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled up in formation. Out stepped 6 federal agents in plain clothes, badges ready, expressions serious. At the head, Special Agent Rivera, Carl's supervisor at the Bureau. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight in and said one sentence. Everyone in this building, step away from the suspects. Now! Special Agent Rivera didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice cut through the room like a scalpel, precise, cold, and final. Everyone in this building, step away from the suspects. Now! Todd was the first to obey. He froze mid-step, still holding Denise's intake form. Slowly, silently, he placed it on the counter and backed away, his hands shaking just enough to notice. Wallace didn't move. Not yet. He blinked once, jaw tight, then forced a chuckle. Is this some kind of mistake? I don't know who you think you are barging in here. Oh, I think you do, Rivera said. He handed over a thick envelope, stamped and sealed, a federal arrest warrant. Wallace R. Wallace, You are under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, obstruction of justice, misuse of government property, and unlawful detainment of federal agents under active assignment. Rivera paused. Would you like to read the charges out loud, or shall I? Silence. Denise stepped forward, pulled out her bureau credentials, and held them up to Wallace's face. Denise Rollins, FBI Counterintelligence, Badge 34671. Your office's computers were compromised 2 hours ago. We've retrieved internal memos, payment trails, falsified invoices, and intercepted calls between you and Councilman Griggs. She turned to Carl, who now stood beside her, calm as a marble statue. Agent Carl Rollins, FBI Operations Field Lead. Every conversation you've had for the past 30 days, recorded. Every time you moved stolen cash using department vehicles, documented. Every time you used your badge to silence whistleblowers, archived. Welcome to federal accountability. Wallace turned pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, then spun toward Todd like a drowning man reaching for a lifeboat. Did you know about this? Todd looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. I thought they were planning a robbery. You just arrested 2 federal agents, Rivera said sharply. Without probable cause, without a warrant, without Miranda. That's a civil rights violation, and it puts your entire department under review by Internal Affairs. Another agent handed Rivera a laptop. He clicked through surveillance footage. Wallace entering the evidence room alone at midnight. Wallace exchanging envelopes in unmarked vehicles. Wallace at City Hall collecting what looked suspiciously like cash payments labeled consulting fees. Rivera turned the screen so Wallace could see. You didn't just cross the line, he said. You danced on it. Wallace snapped. This is a setup. It's political. They planted this. But no one moved to support him, not even his deputies. Carl said quietly, Sheriff, you forgot something. When you make enemies at the federal level, they don't bark. They just wait. And then they close the door behind you. 2 agents moved forward. One read Wallace his rights. The other began to cuff him. Wallace resisted for 1 second, just one. But Denise stepped closer, looked him dead in the eye, and said, You touch that gun, you'll be in a federal courtroom by Monday. In shackles. On TV. That did it. Wallace dropped his arms. The cuffs clicked shut. From the hallway you could hear murmurs, other officers stepping back, whispering, rethinking every conversation they'd ever had in that station. Todd stood frozen in place. Carl approached him, not with anger, but clarity. Todd, you're lucky, he said. You didn't know. But next time, know better. Because jumping to conclusions without evidence, that's how innocent people end up behind bars, or worse. Todd nodded slowly, his face flushed with something between shame and realization. Rivera turned to the team. Secure the station. Begin data extraction. Everyone else? Outside. This is now a federal crime scene. The building emptied in minutes. Reporters had already gathered. Word travels fast in a town where the only real excitement used to be the county fair. Carl and Denise walked out side by side, calm, professional, not triumphant. Just done. Denise looked up at the cloudless sky and muttered, Not bad for a Tuesday. Carl grinned. You still want that pie? Inside the SUV, Rivera handed Carl a folder. Quantico wants the full report by Friday. They're thinking about using this case in the academy. Denise raised an eyebrow. Teaching material? No, Rivera said. Legend material. As the SUV rolled away, past the stunned townspeople, past the news vans and flashing cameras, the story was already being rewritten. Not about 2 strangers planning a heist, but about 2 federal agents who walked into a storm and came out holding the thunder. By noon the next day, Miller's Junction looked nothing like it had 24 hours before. The sheriff's station, once a fortress of small-town power, was now under lock and key, taped off, guarded by U.S. Marshals, with laptops and file cabinets wheeled out under tarps. The sign over the door still said, "To serve and protect," but no one was buying it anymore. News crews circled like hawks. Headlines ran on every major network. Local sheriff arrested in federal sting. FBI uncovers massive fraud ring in small Kentucky town. And perhaps the most unexpected, black couple mistaken for robbers actually FBI agents. That headline stirred something across the country. It wasn't just another crime story. It was a mirror, a quiet reflection of what happens when judgment overtakes facts, when power goes unchecked, when racial bias gets mistaken for vigilance. Back in D.C., the Department of Justice had already drafted a response. The Assistant Attorney General issued a public statement praising agents Carl and Denise Rollins for executing a high-risk undercover operation in a racially charged environment with exceptional restraint and professionalism. Translation: they were profiled, they stayed cool, they brought down a network, and now everyone was watching. But the real twist didn't come from Washington. It came from the town itself. Because when Sheriff Wallace was dragged out in cuffs, his grip on the town didn't disappear. It shattered. And what spilled out next was years of rot. County auditors launched an immediate investigation into city spending. Over a dozen fake vendor accounts were discovered, shell companies created to launder money through public grants. Several of them traced back to friends of Wallace. One was even in his wife's name. And it wasn't just about money. With Wallace gone, officers started talking. Deputies came forward anonymously to the press, describing a culture of silence and retaliation inside the department. One officer admitted he'd been told to pull over out-of-towners more often, especially if they look like they don't belong. Denise read the report with a clenched jaw. "Racial profiling," she whispered. Carl nodded. Pattern, not accident. Meanwhile, the FBI conducted a full internal audit of Miller's Junction's law enforcement practices. Training records were incomplete. Body cam footage is frequently lost. And complaints filed by minority residents? Almost none of them were followed up. It wasn't just a department problem. It was systemic misconduct, and it had been ignored for years. In the middle of all this, one voice cut through: Deputy Todd Brinker. He stood before the local council, under oath, and admitted what happened. "I profiled them," he said. "I thought I was protecting the community. But the truth is, I let my assumptions blind me. I was wrong. They were the ones protecting us." His testimony went viral. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Carl watched the video from a federal safe house 2 states away. "He'll be okay," he said. Denise shrugged. "Still, almost got us killed." "Yeah," Carl said, "but he also gave the public something Wallace never did, accountability." But the Rollins weren't done. 3 weeks later, they were called to testify before a federal ethics committee, alongside DOJ officials and civil rights leaders. Denise spoke first. "We don't get to pick the towns we serve," she said. "And we don't carry our badges to be believed. We carry them to hold the line. But the problem is, sometimes the line is drawn by fear, not by law." Carl added, "Every time someone uses their uniform to silence the weak, to punish the different, to hide what they're doing behind a flag or a gun, we all lose. Not just the victims, the country." The committee applauded. The footage aired nationwide. The DOJ announced a new federal oversight initiative, starting with small-town police departments showing repeated signs of racial disparity, civil rights violations, or financial misconduct. They called it the Junction Protocol, named after Miller's Junction, but inspired by Carl and Denise. It wasn't just policy, it was legacy. And while the Rollins declined every interview request and turned down every book deal, they did agree to one thing: a training program. Quietly, without publicity, they began consulting at the FBI Academy, mentoring new agents in undercover ethics, community sensitivity, and how to survive when the badge isn't visible. Because as Denise put it best, when you're a black agent working undercover, your first enemy isn't always the suspect. Sometimes it's the badge across the table. Meanwhile, Sheriff Wallace, he was facing 17 federal charges, with more pending. His defense attorney tried to spin it as entrapment, political sabotage, or even discrimination. But the evidence was too loud. Emails, wiretaps, signatures. One judge reviewed the case and said flatly, "The sheriff betrayed every principle he swore to uphold. This is not leadership. This is a criminal enterprise wrapped in a badge." Wallace's trial was scheduled for the fall. By then, the town had a new interim police chief, a retired black officer from Lexington, handpicked by the DOJ. The community began healing, not overnight, but publicly. The diner reopened under new ownership, now featuring a framed newspaper clipping near the register. 2 FBI agents walked into a diner. The town never saw it coming. And somewhere in the background, always watching, always 10 steps ahead, Carl and Denise Rollins kept moving. Still undercover, still listening, still reminding America that justice doesn't always wear a uniform, but it always shows up eventually. It wasn't the headlines or the handcuffs that stayed with Carl and Denise Rollins. It wasn't the federal courtrooms or the flash of the cameras outside the sheriff's station. What stayed with them, long after the mission reports were filed, long after Wallace's face disappeared from the news, was that moment in the diner. 2 cups of coffee, 2 people misjudged. That's how fast it happens in America. You see, for all their years in the Bureau, for all their training and tactical operations, it was that moment, the stillness before the accusation, that reminded them why they wore the badge in the first place. Not for power, not for prestige, but to protect something deeper. The right to not be feared for how you look. The right to exist without suspicion. The right to be heard before being handcuffed. That diner didn't just serve pie and coffee. That diner served as the mirror. Because if 2 veteran federal agents could be mistaken for criminals, if they could be profiled, restrained, and interrogated in broad daylight, then what chance does an ordinary person have? That question kept Denise up at night. But Carl, he saw something else. He saw what happened when justice stood its ground, when facts, not fear, shaped the outcome, when the truth didn't flinch. The story of Miller's Junction isn't just about corruption. It's about course correction. It's about a system waking up, slowly, painfully, but waking up nonetheless. And in a world that too often celebrates noise, Carl and Denise reminded us that real change is quiet, tactical, calculated. It moves through locked doors, listens when no one's watching, and acts when no one expects it. Because undercover doesn't mean invisible. It means strategic. They never raised their voices, never made speeches, they just did the job. And because they did, a town was exposed, a sheriff was stopped, and a nation got to see, just for a moment, what it looks like when justice outsmarts injustice. So if you've watched this far, ask yourself this. Would you have seen them the way Wallace did? Or the way the Bureau did? Would you have assumed guilt based on skin or based on facts? Because in a country that prides itself on liberty and law, those questions matter more than ever. If you believe in holding power accountable, if you believe in justice that works from the inside out, hit that subscribe button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged before you spoke? Treated like you didn't belong? Share this story. Someone in your circle needs to hear it. Because the next Carl and Denise, they're already out there. Maybe they're watching this right now.